Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're signing in from today. Thanks everybody for joining us, taking time out of your day. I'm joined live from the field by CUPANI Metals CEO Brian Bosse. How are you today, Brian?
I'm good. I'm on the inside of the door. Back in August, when I did one of these, I was live. We left the door open so you could see the lake. Today it's minus 18, so I'm inside the door today.
Inside might make sense, actually, yeah. So here's how today's going to work. I'm first going to pass it off to Brian for an introduction update. Then I'm going to play a brief video taken recently during fieldwork at CUPANI's Blue Lake project. Then I'm going to ask Brian a few questions. And then take questions from the live audience here. So this is an interactive event, so if you have any questions for Brian, use that chat button in the bottom right of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we can today. Finally, this event is being recorded and will be available for replay this afternoon. You can find it both on Six.com, but also our YouTube page. Please feel free to share the video once it's released. But that's enough out of me. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Brian for a quick introduction.
Yeah, hi there. My name is Brian. For those who don't know, I'm the largest shareholder of the company. I'm here in our remote exploration camp in northern Quebec, and we are doing work this winter for a bunch of different reasons. And what you're about to see is a video really about how we got from the town of Schefferville, which is a open pit iron ore mining town, and our company is copper, nickel, platinum, palladium, but they have a rail that takes ore from Schefferville down to the Atlantic Basin. And that's also our jumping off point to get here. And in the summertime, we've been using helicopters. But in the 1980s, a prior company working in this region actually built an ice road, and they brought super heavy equipment in, and they dug an adit, and they pulled 2,000 tons of material out. And we wanted to get ready to reopen that road because we think our project is going to require that kind of heavy equipment soon. And so we have done a snowmobile trek. There's 6 of us at the beginning. 2 have finished their job and have gone back. So there's 4 of us. And we're staying in our summer camp. And we've just lined it with thermofoil, as you can see up here. And we're running some heaters. And so you're going to see a video of how we get from Schefferville to camp and what the camp looks like. So roll tape. This opening shot is drone footage above the 7 buildings at Ready Lake Camp. You can also see some snowmobile tracks around the buildings. Now in this shot here, also from the drone, you can see by looking at the trees how sparse the vegetation is. It's very easy to drive snowmobiles between the trees, very easy to lay out tracks. And that also means eventually it'll be very easy to do tote roads, truck trails, camp roads, to be able to move people and equipment back and forth amongst the large 500 kilometers we've got. What you're looking at right now are the 2 snowmobile trail breakers, Dixon and Scott, and they're riding up the ridge behind the Ready Lake Camp. And interestingly, that ridge is one of the places where our gravity result needs to be drilled. Here's another drone shot. This one is from that ridge looking backwards. And because everything's covered in a white blanket, it's really hard to spot the Ready Lake Camp, but we'll zoom in on it here. On the right-hand side of the screen where there's no trees, that's the lake itself. And on the left-hand side, there it is. You can start to see the 7 buildings of the camp. So there's 6 in a row and then 1 down by the water. We'll zoom in a little bit closer here. You'll probably get to see, yeah, I think that's one of our geologists walking around, and there's a snowmobile parked on what we call Broadway, which is the walkway connecting all the buildings. It's under snow, you can't see it right now, but it's in our summertime videos. There you can see some of the sleighs that we use. There's one tied up behind the snowmobiles. Everything that we have, we tow behind our snowmobiles to get it to camp. So that's the food, the clothing, the heaters, the gear, the tools, the rock saws, rock hammers. And we were smart enough to leave some fuel at camp at the end of summer, so we had some fuel waiting for us here. And there's a nice zoom out. We're going to have a jump here in a second, and the jump will take us to video footage of a GoPro that I have on my helmet. Here's the jump, okay? So now we're traveling on a road which takes us from the town of Shefferville to Lake Atikamogan. It's a 12-kilometer road. As you can see, it's plowed regularly. It's a gravel road, so when it's covered in snow, it's bumpy for snowmobiles, but you're able to make great time to get from the town to the water's edge. This is, like I said, it's a GoPro that, because of the cold, we usually only get about 20 minutes of GoPro time on a couple of hours, sometimes 3 hours ride from Shefferville to the camp, depending on which route we take. Okay, coming up next is a shot of a charging station. So this is halfway between the town of Baie-Comeau and the town of Labrador City. And here we are back at camp. But the reason why we showed that charging station is because the idea that we can have electric trucks at camp and not have helicopters as much, or maybe helicopters at all, is an important one to get our costs down and get our emissions down. So how do we get the trucks there? Using that station would help. Now what we're looking at is the indoor shots of the bed and breakfast we stay at when we're in Shefferville. It's called the Guest House. It's been there 60 years. I would describe it as cozy. And we're just going to have some closing shots here of buildings and people in the region. So there's Dixon, one of our snowmobile trail breakers, with his machine. And there's a nice shot of snow on the trees.
Awesome. That looked cool. Now I have a couple questions for you, Brian, if you don't mind, just before we jump into audience questions.
Yeah, fire away, Romeo.
So I hate to start with politics, but it's in the news, so I'm going to. Trump did recently order a probe into copper imports, which many see as the first step in setting tariffs on the metal. I'm curious your perspective on how you think this is going to impact Canadian copper stories.
2 thumbs up.
Okay.
So anyone who's been following me a long time has read my writing over the years. And look, China just operates a different non-market economy. And although it took Trump for the rest of the world to realize it or to care, he's absolutely right that they're not solving for the same things when they run their society as the Western countries are. So the investigation he's called for it under national security legislation. So it's not really about economics. It's about, does the U.S. have the ability to have all the metals they need? Should they be in an extended ground war or naval war with a almost equal enemy? That's what that legislation's about. And the 3 main countries that export copper from their locations into the U.S. are China, Chile, and Canada. Canada being the smallest of the 3. So really this is about China, which is the only country of those 3 that could even be considered a military near equal to the U.S. Okay.
Sure.
So how I see this playing out is tariffs will happen on copper. The tariffs will either be the highest or last the longest or the most stringent against China. Canada will be either a low tariff compared to China, which is great for us,
sure,
or exempted altogether because the U.S. already has a law in the books called the National Defense Act. And that law sets out which jurisdictions the U.S. considers to be a safe jurisdiction from which to get resources. So that's all of the 50 states plus Canada. So in the long run, what I think and hope will happen for both this company and for all Canadian copper producers is that there's a tariff on Chinese sourced copper or Chinese processed copper, and there's no tariff on Canadian copper. So we'll have a price advantage, plus we're closer. Plus, as you already know, under the Defense Production Act, the U.S. has given money to Canadian companies to help get into production anyway. So all for it. I think this is absolutely great for us. In addition, it will raise the world price of copper just because it'll undermine the economies of scale that the Chinese have. And so yesterday, for example, I think the press releases or the headlines started to cross, and copper went up 20 cents a pound to $4.70 US. That's a great price for us. That's huge. Okay, so yes, those are my thoughts.
So 2 thumbs up. No, I appreciate it.
Thumbs up.
I do want to zoom in on Blue Lake. I know you're in the field now. I'm curious if you could just let the folks in the room know as well. Who are the local stakeholders and partners for your project in Quebec, and how have all those discussions gone so far?
Right. So there's one First Nation. It's called the Naskapi Nation of, and I always pronounce this slowly so I get it right, Kawamachikak. Okay. They have their own community right near Shefferville, but many of them also live in Shefferville. They have in 1976, they did an agreement for semi-autonomy, which is common up here, with the provincial government of Quebec. And our relations with them are excellent. The very first time I met the mining liaison officer from the Naskapi Nation, it was over lunch, and I'll paraphrase. He said, "We're not against mining, we're just against bad deals." And when the iron ore pits were built in the 1940s and 50s without our consent, it was a bad deal for us because we didn't get anything out of it. Although they now own the railway. Remember I talked about the railway? So they own that. So they now make a buck every time something gets shipped, and they'll certainly make a buck every time our ore gets shipped.
Sure.
They're interested in the economic development. They're interested in the jobs. They're interested in everything that comes with it. We asked them, what do you want from us? They said, go find something. Okay. And then to underline their forward thinking, or I guess their approach to business, our second largest shareholder, Douglas McCory, the founder of Asante, by the way, if you're not familiar with that company, go look it up. That's Asante Gold, ticker ASE. He sent me a CBC News article from just 2 days ago because I was in camp. I wasn't watching the news. 4 First Nations got together and bought the Hilton Hotel in downtown Quebec City 3 days ago. The Naskapi were one of the 4 First Nations. So I think it was led by Cree of Northern Quebec. There was Micmac from Nova Scotia or New Brunswick. There was Naskapi, Northern Quebec. I don't remember the 4th, but the fact that they're buying hotels tells you they understand how to build for generations as essentially a sovereign wealth fund of the Naskapi Nation, and they're doing a great job at it. So I don't think it's fair to characterize them as anti-development or anti-mining or anti-money or anti-anything, because they're not. They came out to camp. We brought them out in I guess September. We brought them out in September, spent the day showing them what we're doing, what rocks we're hitting, where we're sleeping, and they said, great, keep on going.
Awesome.
So yeah, very happy with that so far.
No, it sounds great.
And we've got our drilling applications in as of May of 2024 in Quebec. Your drilling application has to also be alongside something called an ATI, which is an authorization to do work. It's a notification process to the locals, to the nations. So we've already had our ATI meeting with the Naskapi, and they said, that's great. I think they mentioned they've got a goose hunt that they do in a particular week in April. And I said, great. Well, we won't be there. Perfect. That's it.
Yeah, that's easy. Nice. Now I got to ask, you said it's minus 18, but you are there. So I'm curious, the camp is now open year round then, I guess?
Yeah. So of the 7 buildings you just saw, we've insulated 1.5. So I'm in the one that's fully insulated. There's another one in the row that's half insulated. But we have the same generators that we're running in the summertime. We just run them here in the winter. The same heaters we run in the summertime, we run them here in the winter. And the next thing I am planning to add is actually wind turbines to generate our own electricity without burning any fossil fuel at all. The best part about that, although it'll be a bit of an engineering trick, is the wind blows hardest in the winter. So that might mean that as long as the wind is not too strong and it knocks down the 55-foot pole with the wind turbine on it, you could actually do electric heat here.
Oh, cool.
So, and we're all about figuring out the newest, smartest, most efficient way to do things, because dragging fuel is not terribly efficient.
Sure.
Right? So
That makes
Yeah.
sense. There's actually a couple of questions in the chat that are right on topic here, so I'm going to throw those at you. Somebody notes the internet looks pretty good. So if you could just explain the internet setup you got, Camp.
Sure. So we're on Wi-Fi right now on my Surface laptop, and that's from Microsoft. So if I move my head, the camera will follow me. So just FYI.
It's fancy.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Ritzy.
And so there's a one spot, there's a 1 unit Wi-Fi from Starlink, and the Starlink is outside the building, and we just run a cable in through the window.
Great. That's something in the chat said Starlink works great. So there you go.
Yeah, it's good.
And writer Peter Epstein wants to know from the chat, is there wind or solar potential as a back or a supplemental power?
Okay, so let's talk about wind a little bit longer. Wind, if let me see it. So in our most recent corporate presentation, which I think you'll find on the website, by the way, new website, CUPANImetals.com, as of 3 hours ago. Go check it out. You can download the deck. The deck that's on there, the second last page, I think, is a map of mean, which is a synonym for average, but not exactly the same as average, a map for mean wind speed in Quebec. And it rates all the different locations in deciles from worst to best, right? So 10th decile would be best, if I have that oriented right. And where we are is second best. And so we're actually in conversation with a company that makes wind turbines for remote deployment. So they're, think of them as 1.5 kilowatt hour wind turbines that are stood up on a 55-foot steel pole with guy wires to hold it up. When you don't want to use it, you just bend the whole pole down again because it's on a pivot. It comes in a box. You build it here on site. And to put it in terms most people can understand, because kilowatt hours gets confusing, the wind blows at different speeds at different seasons. So it blows hardest in the winter, it blows least in the summer. Summer, of course, is when we want to do our work.
Sure.
However, the summer wind here with a 55-foot pole and a turbine on top is enough to twice a week charge an F-150 pickup truck from empty to full.
Cool.
Okay, so I'm just trying to give you what kind of usage that is, right? So you could drive, what are those, 600-kilometer trucks, 500-kilometer trucks? So you could drive 1,000 kilometers a week on wind power if you're on the 401 or the Highway 20 or whatever. Now, imagine a remote camp where people are in the woods all the time, banging rocks most of the day, and then sleeping at night. That is more than enough power to run the refrigerator, the heaters, the microwave, the hot water heater, all the stuff that, plus we're going to get 2 or 3 of these wind turbines and put them up. So we're very excited about that. And yeah, it's less, we think the payback for that, if not a single year, is 2 years at most.
Okay.
So one of the things we're doing out here is looking for wind turbine location spots, and then we're going to be drilling into the nearby rock because you need to put in rock bolts as foundation to hold that pivot and the 55-foot steel tower, and then all the guy wires. So not terribly sexy in terms of drilling, because you're only drilling about 8 inches and you're measuring how much rock tension it can take, but yeah, that's what we're doing. There's a huge ability here to do exploration with low to no fossil fuel, and also low to no logistics hassle of moving things back and forth, right?
Sure.
But maybe to Peter's real point is, once a mine starts to get built, can you power it with a wind farm? Absolutely. Right? If you think about if there's enough wind to power the exploration camp on something that's only about 2 feet across in terms of its wind blade, now put up one of those small wind farms, 2, 3, 4 towers that you see that are 200 feet tall. You're generating a lot of electricity. You're generating it for free. You'll need battery to store it, but that's an easy problem to solve in terms of mine design. And it either means you don't have to connect to the grid, or you can only connect to the grid at a price that's good for you. I mean, you say to the province, all right, well, you build the line. We don't need to build the line. And it might also mean that you end up running on wind, pick a number, 30, 40, 80% of the time, wind and battery combo, and you only run natural gas or diesel the rest of the time, and your costs come way down. And the really good part about that is if a mine is a 20-year asset, which most of them are, hopefully this will be a 100-year asset, the only cost in the wind is the capex to build it once. Right? So as inflation forever pushes copper and nickel prices up, but you've already built your wind farm, you're building into your business model, into the income statement, a positive cushion versus everyone else in the industry who's still spending on fuel every year.
Yeah, it's interesting. Peter in the chat added he thinks it's possible that mining companies might get paid to use wind in the future by government ESG initiatives. So that's something to think about for the future as well.
Tell me more, Peter.
Yeah. Next question I got, I know we saw some of it in the video, which is great, but I'm curious if you could just get in a bit more detail about what transit is like from the nearest city, and just generally what the surrounding infrastructure is and the plan for potential development.
Okay, so we're in Quebec. I don't know if we can get any maps up in a hurry here, but there's maps on the company website. We're in Quebec. The St. Lawrence River flows through most of Quebec. There's a town on the north shore of the St. Lawrence called Sept-Îles, which in English means 7 islands, and you can pick it out easy because there's 7 islands in the river. Going straight north from Sept-Îles, like I said, is a railway that already for the last 60 years has delivered iron ore to the coast, to Sept-Îles. That railway goes north about 500 kilometers, if my memory is right, to the town of Schefferville, which is where we deployed from here. And Schefferville is 65 kilometers from where I'm standing. So 65 kilometers from Schefferville to where we are at camp. And our camp is in the center of a large 500 kilometer square exploration zone, most of which is, on average, if you're drawing the arc of the circle, is about 60 to 70 kilometers from Schefferville. So what have we done so far to get here? We've done helicopter from Schefferville. That's what we did last summer. This trip, we drove our snowmobiles to Schefferville, and we did that from a starting point in Labrador City, Newfoundland, which is the nearest paved road to Schefferville. And then we came across the lakes. There's one big lake called Lake Atikamogan that's 12 clicks from Schefferville. Came across the lake, and then there's a series of smaller lakes, and we're following and reopening the ice road that heavy equipment like crushers and dozers and dump trucks were brought in here on an ice road in 1987. So we're reopening that. So in terms of snowmobile ride, it's a 3 and change hour snowmobile ride right now from Schefferville. That number will go down as we get better at reopening the road. Right, sure. It'll get wider. The track will get set into the snow, and then in the summertime, we either do. Last year we did helicopters or float planes. This upcoming summer, I'm sure we'll have some kind of helicopter, some kind of float plane, but we might also get a barge to come across the lake, bring heavy items over the barge, and then just have the heavy items drive up the ice trail, which will then be melted, so it'll just be a dirt trail to get here. Cool. And when it gets here, it'll see a camp hopefully running on some kind of wind power, as well as gas generator backup. So I don't know if I've answered the question, but I've tried to describe what we've got.
No, it's helpful, and getting a sense of what it'll work like in the summer this year is also, I think, great. But I do want to get into exploration efforts because I know you're in the field now. I'm curious, how's sampling gone in the Cancun zone specifically so far?
So tomorrow's our big Cancun day. We've got a rock saw with us. For those who don't know, Cancun was discovered in September of 2024, so late in our season last year. It's 9 kilometers of continuous magnetic response and mineralization in the shape of a U, and it's about 10 miles from here. And what we've done so far is outcrop sample, and then we dug a shallow trench just about 2 feet, because that's all you need to do to get to the rock. We did some sampling from that. And the samplings there came from a high number of 1% copper equivalent down to, I think it went as low as 0.47 or maybe 0.3. It's in our deck. You can look it up. Call me if you have any questions. But what's really interesting is that same kind of grade, 1 down to a half, is also found above the historical tonnage and the historical tonnage grade is 2.23. These are all copper equivalences. So the open question at the moment is there the same lower grade on surface at Cancun versus what's underneath as there is at Blue Lake? So this is one of the first things we want to get to with a drilling campaign later this year, hopefully in the next couple of months. So what we're going to be doing on this trip is via snowmobile, because we've already it's the wrong word. We've already done a path from where I'm standing to Cancun. We're going to go back out on snowmobile, and we're going to choose the drilling locations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But more importantly, for immediate knowledge, we're going to go back to that trench. We're going to shovel out the snow, brush everything off, and we're going to essentially make cuts down, down, down as deep as we can. We're currently targeting 15 inches down. Maybe we can get farther, maybe we get less, we don't know. But it's, a day or two's work. We're already here. It doesn't cost us anything to do that. We'll be using an electric saw, and then we'll be able to hopefully come away with sampling of 15 inches down. And then we'll send that to the lab and see if it's either equal to what was on the surface. Is it equal to what the Blue Lake 2.23 is, or is it something in between? So that'll be key knowledge that'll come out of this. And then if that knowledge comes quick enough, it'll help us decide even more about what to do next at Cancun, drill a lot or drill a little. So that's that on this particular trip. Obviously, that's the first data piece we're going to get back. The other exploration we've done so far on this trip is we have, and for those who are new to us, we have a huge land package. We call the whole thing the Blue Lake Project, and we've split it into 5 zones, and we've labeled the zones alphabetically. So there's one that begins with letter A, one that begins with letter B, one that letter C, D, and E. So E we call the extension zone. Nobody's actually been there. We staked it last year because government reports show that there are at least 200 parts per million copper in the lake beds. So the question is, where's the copper coming from? And so for the very first time, we've gone out on snowmobile just a day and a half ago to drive around, follow the rock type that carries the mineralization in all the other zones. We picked up some samples from that. It's difficult, of course, to do sampling in the snow, but if you haven't been there before, it's also hard to plan a sampling campaign. So That's why we went out there. We've got some samples of the rock type. There's no reason to think they're mineralized, but it'll help us measure the gravity of that rock and a few other things like the sulfur content, which will then help us get smarter about the summer exploration for the extension zone.
Great. No, appreciate all those details. I think that's really helpful. One thing, it's my understanding an organization recently initiated research coverage in CUPANI. Curious if you can give just the folks in the room and maybe some more details on that.
Sure. So the outfit is called Fundamental Research Corp. What I know about them is that they were one of the first people to cover power nickel.
Sure.
Shout out to Terry Lynch. They were also one of the first people to cover Asante Gold. Shout out Douglas McQuarrie. So in those examples, Fundamental Research has done a great job of being able to take what's currently known and what's reasonably expected and build it into a forecast price and write an initiation research report. So in our case, they've done that. They've got a target price of 70 cents a share. I kind of think they're conservative, but you would imagine I'm biased that way. And on ceo.ca/CUPA/CUPA or ceo.ca/CUPA, not me, but somebody's put a link up to that already. So if anyone wants to read it, by all means, go read it. We think they're on the right track. What they've done is taken an estimate on each of the 5 zones I just described. Mm. They've converted that estimate into how much material might there be. Then they took that number and converted it into a pounds of copper equivalent. They added it up for the company. They put a big fat discount rate on it because it's all guessing at the moment.
Sure.
And then they took that conservative guessing and compared it to other public companies that already have something discovered and compared the amount of copper pounds in the ground to the market capitalization of those companies. on the assumption that nobody's really heard of CUPANI, which is true.
Sure.
We're just starting out. And when we get recognized enough to be valued equally as those other companies, what would that value be? And 70 cents is their number for now. Yeah.
Cool. No, appreciate that. And yeah, please do look up that coverage for the folks in the room. One question from the chat. Simon Lee asks, when do you think the OTC listing is going to be ready?
I'll check my watch. Hold on. I would expect at any moment between now and the end of March.
Great. Thank you. Wesley from the chat asks, what percentage of exploration does Quebec refund these days?
Okay. So first of all, let me explain the question. Quebec is a great jurisdiction for both exploration and for mining. Full stop, bar none. Great jurisdiction. We are in northern Quebec, so we're north of the 55 latitude parallel. And so last year in the field, I think we spent $2.5 million. I'm expecting the reimbursement rate on that spending from the Quebec government, and I know they do a maximum of 38%, but each individual reimbursement application gets reviewed, and some of them get thrown out, and some of them get accepted, and it's kind of arbitrary as to what rate they get, in and around just below 38. So I'm trying to be conservative and figured we'll get 25 or 30% back on $2.5 million spend. So, think of that as $500,000 in the bank cash that doesn't show up on the company balance sheet yet. And we'll get that money probably the middle of this calendar year when the reimbursement process comes through. And then after the 2025 calendar year is over and the 2025 spend has been tallied, we'll make an application for reimbursement again. And of course, because we expect to be drilling, we'll spend a lot more, which means the reimbursement will be a lot more.
Gotta love Quebec. It's great.
Just a great spot. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing, I know we're at the half-hour mark. One thing I always like to ask, with what's coming up, what are you most excited about for this year's exploration efforts for CUPANI?
It's two. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I can't sleep because I'm wondering how big Cancun is going to be. And then on the weekends, so I really only sleep Monday nights. On the weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I lie awake wondering how big the Blue Lake Zone gravitational response drilling is going to show the material to be. And to explain that, there's a part of our Blue Lake project, which we call the Blue Lake Zone, begins with a B. I know it's not terribly inventive to reuse the same name, but there's nearly 5 million tons of historical deposit. And by historical, I mean it was drilled off in the 1980s, so it predates the National Instrument 43-101 rules that came in the early 2000s. So therefore, I have to say it's not a resource in today's language, but the material's there. And they were open in several different directions, but it was the 1980s. They didn't have the good geophysics technology that we have today. So in 2024, on Douglas McCorry's recommendation, we had someone come and measure the gravitational field around that historical deposit. Really, we're looking for heavy rocks that haven't been drilled before. And we ended up with an immense result of heavy rocks that haven't been drilled before. So we're going to be drilling them to test the theory that these heavy rocks are actually mineralized rocks. And look, 5 million tons can become, pick a number, if those gravity results turn out the way we hope they do. So yeah, a lot of sleepless nights, but for all the right reasons.
No, that's certainly stuff to be excited about. Brian, thanks. This was so much fun. I love insights from the field. I know our investors always do too. Great to have you live from the spot where the actual action happens. Folks in the room, thanks so much for joining us too, asking questions. If you think of the perfect question to ask right after we close today, please do still send it in. I'll make sure Brian gets it and he'll get back to you as soon as he can. But Brian, I'll throw it to you for last words before we jump today.
Look, I think we've covered a lot, so I'm glad people got to hear it. What I would love for people to take away from this is that we have a management team, myself, the directors, who are heavily invested. I mean, the management team, well, the directors themselves, as a collection, we own more than 52% of the company. The dollars that we raise get spent on exploration, right? We're not flying to one Azaris for conferences, and we're not spending money on first class tickets. Like I drove my own Buick from Toronto to Lab City with a car full of gear to bring up here. So this is a journey as a company. We think we're going to have a great destination, and we think it's a really good opportunity to invest alongside people who know what they're doing and are going to treat you right as shareholders. So my name is Brian Bosse. My phone number is 416-844-5712. If you have questions about the company, give me a call.
Awesome. Brian, thanks so much. Everybody who joined. Have a great afternoon. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks, Romeo.